Hello everybody! Today I'm here to do some snappy reviews of all of the novels and nonfiction that I read at the end of June and throughout July. I am so far behind on wrapping things up. I still haven't talked about 2 weeks worth of stuff I read so far in August. How are we already halfway through August? Oh my god. So I'm kind of throwing in the towel and not doing longer reviews. I'm going to actually try to keep this relatively short for each book. And if you want further thoughts on anything, leave me a comment down below. I will type it out for you. First up is Six Moon Dance by Sheri Tepper. It is the third and final science fiction novel in this massive bright yellow omnibus. I've buddy read all 3 of the books in this with Joe from Final Blow Joe, since we have a tradition of buddy reading Tepper novels. And I liked this particular one. It was miles better than the previous one, Shadow's End, which I kind of hated a little bit. Six Moon Dance takes place on a planet called New Home, where women are the majority and control society, and men are not treated particularly well. And then an outside observer comes in to kind of judge their society and figure out what's going on, because there's a unbalance there. And also there's a ton of seismic activity, and it's all related. I thought this reminded me a lot of the Arby novels by Tepper, but not as superb plotting perhaps, but it has those, many different POVs, many different storylines that slowly converge, and I enjoy that experience of the storyline starting to meet up and the explanations falling into place. It was enjoyable and I liked a lot of the characters. Unfortunately, it does suffer from that very typical Tepper problem, which is it's contrived and forced. You can definitely see Tepper behind the scenes moving things, tweaking the variables, amping up certain personalities and stuff to get the outcome that she wants. And it's just so obvious. Even if it's a good story, it doesn't happen naturally. It's being made a certain way for a point, and I don't always love that. It was still pretty darn good though. Thejumbies by Tracey Baptiste. This is a middle grade fantasy novel set on a Caribbean island. It follows a young girl named Corinne and her 3 new friends as they deal with a relatively nasty Jumbie named Severin. Jumbies are like shapeshifters and tricksters. I feel like they're kind of a Caribbean style fae in a way. And yeah, so a Jumbie named Severin comes to town. She wants something, she's not very nice, and they have to deal with her. And Corinne learns about her own family connection to the Jumbies. I loved this. I listened to it on audiobook, and it's narrated by Robin Miles, who just does a superb job. It really comes to life with the narrator. And I loved it so much that I bought the audiobook of the second book in the series, which I talked about in a previous wrap-up, probably my Reading Rush one, talking about them in reverse order, but they were both really good. Real Men Knit by Kwana Jackson. I bought this one purely for the title because I thought it was funny. And it's a contemporary romance novel. It is about 4 brothers who are adopted by their foster mother. She ran a yarn and fiber store and she died unexpectedly. The brothers have to decide what to do with the store, and one of them wants to keep it open. So Jesse says, give me some time to see if I can make the store profitable, and the kind of like former shop assistant Carrie agrees to stay on and help him until she needs to leave to dedicate herself to her full-time career. And they have a thing for each other, sparks fly. There's a lot of angst because they don't seem to be on the same page about how serious they are, etc. This one was alright. I expected far more knitting content. I mean, the title is Real Men Knit. I think there are only 2 scenes in the entire book that show men knitting, and you don't get to one of them until 60% of the way through the book. Come on. It was relatively fun though. Unfortunately, it's one of those romance novels where I did not understand the relationship between the 2 romantic leads. They are basically childhood friends who never really got to know each other well, and I thought that they should have just been friends, like platonic friends, and not romantic partners, because I did not feel the chemistry. Also, it needed more knitting. Let me just repeat that. It needed more knitting! It takes place in a yarn store! Dragon Pearl by Yoon Lee. This is a middle grade fantasy novel from the Rick Riordan Presents line, and I thought this one was just alright. I can't believe I'm saying that about a Yoon Lee novel, but I think I much prefer his adult SFF works. Mostly this book didn't work for me because I didn't like the protagonist. It's about a teenage girl who runs away from home to find out what happened to her brother, who's supposedly like defected from the military space force. She doesn't believe he would actually do that, so she sets out to find out, you know, what actually happened. And I thought she was a terrible decision maker. Everything she decides to do seemed very spur of the moment, very ill thought out, and a lot of her actions have bad consequences to other people. I thought she was incredibly self-centered and misused other characters that she supposedly liked. I just could never warm up to her. I did enjoy the second half of the story more when some of the revelations started happening. It was more interesting, but I just couldn't really get into it, and that makes me kind of sad. The Plot is Murder by V.M. Burns. This is a cozy murder mystery novel, and I read it because I have always secretly wanted to just randomly read a bunch of those cozy mystery novels that have dogs and cats and armchairs on the covers, and all the titles are puns on desserts. So this one presented itself, I read it, and it was bad in every possible way. Oh my god. I'm not gonna sit here and rant about this book forever, but this is the worst written book that I have read all year. It was so amateurish. There were so many factual errors and stuff in the book that I was astonished it was published by an actual traditional publisher. It was an incredibly low quality book, and the protagonist doesn't even do any of her own freaking detective work. Her Nana Jo does it instead, and like the only reason to read this book or this series is for Nana Jo and all of her cronies from the local retirement community, because those are some badass old ladies and they do all the actual work. Ugh. God, this book was disappointing. Next up, I listened to the audiobook of Something Deeply Hidden, Quantum Worlds and the Emergence of Space-Time by Sean Carroll. So this is a nonfiction book about quantum theory and quantum physics, and I think pretty much that the author's thesis was quantum physics is kind of looked down upon by a lot of physicists. It's not necessarily an area that researchers are encouraged to explore for reasons that he explains. And he uses this book to explain more what quantum physics and various theories actually are and what they're actually saying, to correct a lot of assumptions that people have and a lot of popular beliefs about quantum physics that are simply not true. It was actually a very interesting book, and I wish that I had read it in print rather than listening to it, because my attention was very split while I was listening to it. I don't remember nearly enough of it, but it was definitely an interesting take on quantum physics, and he talked about some things that I've never heard other people talk about in other books on the subject. Take a Hint, Danny Brown by Talia Hibbert is probably one of my favorite romance novels I have read so far this year. It is the sequel to Get a Life, Chloe Brown, which I also enjoyed, but I thought Take a Hint was laugh out loud funny. I think I snorted my way through the first 50 pages of this book because the banter and the wit were just perfect. It was great. This is definitely a romance novel where I felt like the romantic leads were meant for each other, and I very frequently come away from romance novels thinking, where was the chemistry? Why are these people actually together? Not the case here. I thought that the two characters, Dani, and I've just forgotten his name, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Like individually, they were very interesting, complex people, and together, they just complemented each other so well. The only thing about this book that I struggled with was the level of angst, because there's a pretty long period where the two of them just start worrying that their fake dating relationship will end and they won't be able to see the other one, and just, they should have put on their adult panties and talked to each other. Anyway, it all worked out. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I look forward to the third book in the series. Archaeology from Space by Sarah Parcak. This is another nonfiction book. It is not about astroarchaeology. It is not about archaeology on other planets. It is about using satellite imagery, aerial photography, and image manipulation to find and explore archaeological sites on Earth. This is really cool. That's why I picked up the book. And I'm tepid about the book overall, though. Parcak spends the majority of the book just explaining how modern archaeology works, which is also interesting, but not necessarily the point of the title of the book. She does dive into a couple of like case studies of her own work where she used space archaeology methods, and she explains that, but it took a long time to get to there. I also felt like the final chapter or two of this book were all over the place. It felt like Parcak wanted to address every single issue in the archaeological field, things like diversity and women being included, but she didn't have enough to say, so she just wrote a paragraph on every issue and shoved it into a final chapter, and it was just really all over the place. I wish that she had stuck to the topic a lot more and gotten into the nitty-gritty and the technical details, because I like that kind of thing. Instead, it just felt like a primer on modern archaeological methods, and that is still worth reading, but not what I thought I was going to get. Next, I read two romance novels by Sebastian, A Duke in Disguise and Unmasking the Marquess. I have read this trilogy in reverse order. I read the third book first, then I read the second book, and then I read the first book, and you should read them in the other order because the first book is the best one. So A Duke in Disguise is about a common man working in a print shop who discovers that, hey, he might be the long-lost son of an aristocratic family and he should establish who he is and inherit the dukedom. And he's not so sure if he should do that because the woman that he loves is very, like, anti-noble people. It was relatively fun, but this is the one Sebastian novel I've ever read that I thought was sloppy. The plotting and the pacing of the story was just janky. Like, what is this mess? I also did not think that the man and the woman had any chemistry. They had a really good friendship. You know, once again, childhood friends, a lot of loyalty there. They were so good as friends. Zero chemistry whatsoever. It's part of what led me kind of just scratching my head at the end of the book, like, what is this plot? What are these characters? There was a good idea here, and it just sort of fell apart. It didn't feel at all. Like, there was no emotion there. I wasn't so sure after A Duke in Disguise that I wanted to read the rest of this series, because I was pretty let down by that book, but I decided to read Unmasking the Marquess anyway because I needed more light, fluffy stuff in my life at the moment, and it was really good. This one has a complex plot, a lot of character development, and just an overall very interesting and relatively tense scenario that plays out well. The two romantic leads are a bisexual man, the Marquess Alistair, and a non-binary person who is originally Charity Church, then becomes Robert Selby, but is actually referred to as Robin throughout most of the book. And I'm going to use female pronouns for her, despite her being canonically non-binary, because that's what the text uses, and there's a whole author's note about that. Basically, Robin assumed the identity of Robert Selby because he sent her off to Cambridge in his stead because he didn't want to go. So she's been living as a man for the last 5 years. When the original Selby dies, she continues to assume his identity in order to keep the family's money and estate so that his sister has some means. Basically, she can't inherit because she's a woman. And Robin and the sister, who I can't remember her name right now, they are essentially sisters. They treat each other like family. So they come to London seeking a husband for the sister, and Robin asks the Marquess for a favor and kind of getting them involved in society and helping them meet people. And then Alistair discovers her secret, and they're really into each other. I hated Alistair for 75% of this book. He is a curmudgeon. He is just a kind of nasty piece of work. He's so tied up in trying to rehabilitate his family's image. He wants to do all of the good, dutiful, right things. He doesn't want to be involved in any scandals. He's basically denying himself any sort of happiness to preserve the noble appearance that he thinks he must have. It's so freaking annoying. He's such a mean person to the people around him. But he does change. Like, once he realizes that he wants to be with Robin, that he can be happy with somebody, he basically learns what it's like to be happy and to have some fun in your life, and that it doesn't necessarily mean that you become a terrible person. So yeah, I really enjoyed this one. And lastly for this wrap up, The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. This is pretty much a novella. I was going to talk about it in my short stuff wrap up, but I forgot about it, so it's here instead. This is a classic science fiction story from the 1890s. Apparently a lot of people know what this one is about. I did not. I went into it completely blind. It's a very popular story that I knew nothing about except the main character is an invisible man. And the first half of this story, I was really frustrated and not really enjoying it because I thought that it was asking me to sympathize with a terrible person. And then the second half of the story kicks into gear and it's like, oh no, the Invisible Man is meant to be an arrogant ass. You're not supposed to like him. This is pretty much a morality tale about ethics and scientific research. So yeah, my feelings on this one are relatively lukewarm. It's interesting to finally know what this story is, and it's a bit old-fashioned. It has at least one sequence of racism in it. It's showing its age a little bit, but it actually wasn't as boring or as awful as I thought it was going to be when I first started listening to the audiobook. I am so tired of talking now. Oh my, those are all of the novels and nonfiction books I read in roughly a 6-week period. I'm finally done wrapping up July, guys. Just in time to start in on all the things I read in August. So let me know if you have any thoughts about these books. Leave me some comments down below, and I'll be back to talk to you again soon about more things, and until then, bye.